There we go. We're ready to go. Thank you very much.
Right, thanks, Emma. Hi, everybody. Mike, you're going to get the slides up.
Yep, I am. There we go.
Thank you. Good to see a good turnout for a subject that is very close to my heart, and also Mike, hence why we're actually doing a double act today in terms of facilitating this presentation webinar. It is going to be more of a discussion, so we will be asking for your input and feedback as we go along. More than happy to take questions as well, but we are going to use the message board. Emma, if you can just give some instructions in terms of how that works, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's just the chat function. So where people would just pop in messages in previously, just pop them in there and I'll keep a record of them until none are missed.
Great, okay, thanks, Emma. Okay, so the first slide really is about us. So this slide tells you a bit about Meraki Consult. We're a boutique consulting firm that work with organisations, employability organisations, and government departments in areas such as organisational change management, tech and assurance related areas too. In terms of background, my background, just a bit about me. So I started Meraki last year, but previously have worked within the employability space for a number of years. I started my journey with the employment service, so that was well before the inception of Job Centre Plus, worked across Job Centre Plus and also DWP, and for organisations that were delivering contracts on behalf of the DWP. Organisations such as the Salvation Army and also Shore Trust. My background predominantly has been within the assurance space and leading all the essential stuff like risk, quality, assurance, information security, etc. At DWP also, I was part of the team that set up and implemented the DWP provider assurance regime across the national network. I led the implementation in particular across London, South East and East of England. Mike, do you want to give a bit of an introduction?
Yes, sure. So I'm Mike Carne. My background, similar to Sejal, has been in public sector, local authority through to third sector, which is the Shore Trust, is where Sejal and myself met. And she was my boss, and she still is. And I don't mind. But my background is primarily internal audit focused. So qualified internal auditor, chartered auditor, and then moved into risk management, business risk primarily, latterly quality assurance and business continuity management as well. So it's primarily around risk management, audits, all that good stuff to keep everyone safe and secure.
All the essential stuff. So, you know, between us, we've got a wealth of experience, lived experience in assurance. The next slide just outlines the purpose of the webinar. And today what we wanted to do was explore assurance in more depth with you, use this as an opportunity. Assurance itself means different things to people. And, you know, within employability in particular, we use it in, you know, the word in the context of like quality, risk and compliance. But, you know, what really is assurance? You know, why is it so important? Why is it that, you know, organizations such as employability organizations need assurance? Where does it come from? And how does it drive continuous improvement? You know, we want to also demystify assurance and talk a bit about, explore a bit around assurance and the link to compliance risk in particular. So that's what we'll be doing today. So without further ado, what we'll do is we'll deep right into the first session, which is what is assurance? So take a moment to think about what assurance means to you, and using the chat function, tell us what you think assurance is. What does assurance mean to you? What is it?
Don't be frightened of typing.
Is it a tick in a box? Okay, checking processes. Think of reassurance, okay, ensuring all relevant processes are followed.
Okay, got a few chats coming in. Emma, can you tell us what people are saying?
Yep, that's fine. Yeah, so we've got let me just scroll back because they are actually coming in thick and fast, which is great. So we have Stuart has said independent confirmation that systems, processes and policies will deliver the expected outcome or result, could be compliance or performance. Jan Townsend has said knowing, and Louise McGregor identifying training needs based on checks on process, and Scott has said assessing quality standards to ensure that all processes and policies are compliant. And then we have two new ones. We have Jan has also said knowing that process is being followed and complied with. So that's everyone's responses so far.
Excellent. That's some really good responses there. Shall we move on to the next slide, Sejal, so we can discuss that further?
Yeah. So you'll be surprised to know that assurance is not simply ticking the box, nor is it just the existence of policies and procedures and checking. Assurance is actually certainty, confidence and evidence to demonstrate and confirm that what should be happening is actually happening in practice. So an example would be that there's evidence that you've got your policies and procedures, for instance, are up to date, they exist, and that they are applied in line with your company or legal obligations. Now, what we mean by exist is that staff are aware of them, they know where they are kept, they understand them broadly, not chapter and verse, but more importantly, that they apply and follow procedure. And there's evidence, and that evidence is valid, it's accurate, it's documented, and it's sufficient, it's comprehensive, and it provides you with assurance and certainty that what should be happening, so what's described or outlined in your policy or procedure, is actually happening in practice.
When we discussed this, we use the example of a new house. If you're going to buy a new house, you might see the house standing there on the building site, and that gives you certainty that the house exists. Are you confident the house exists? Well, you go off and you touch it, so it's there, and you go inside and look around it. But what's key to all this is really important is the evidence, and the evidence things such as the NHBC certificate, the electrical safety certificates, all these things that tell you that that house is safe to live in. That's what gives you the assurance that A, it exists, and B, that it's safe to live in as well. So there's all these things put in together.
Assurance is also subjective, and Mike and I have had debates and discussions about this, haven't we, Mike, at
Absolutely.
length over the years. It is subjective. You know, assurance, call it level of confidence, should you wish, is subjective, you know, and it differs. So my confidence level will differ to Mike's. He might require more evidence to, you know, support and satisfy and assure him than I do. And that's something, you know, within organisations, it's really important to agree on. And perhaps also, if you're looking at risk, to link it to your risk appetite. But it is subjective. It's not compliance where it's very black and white. So, you know, it's either ticked or not, the box, you know, but it is also supported by evidence, sufficient evidence, you know, to ensure that, you know, you've got enough there to tell you or to assure you that all those things are in place and what should be happening is actually happening in practice.
So probably leads us to our next question then, which is, why is assurance so important? So again, perhaps there's some thoughts from yourselves around the virtual room as to why you believe assurance might be such an important thing. Again, I'll just leave you a couple of seconds to
think of it in a context of employability, or as a customer, you know, someone who accesses a service or buys a product, why would assurance be so important to you? Fairness and equality of service. Any more?
Okay, well, a few more chats coming in now, I can see.
Oh yeah, Martin saying to show the quality of outcome. Are you getting what you've paid for? John, as a taxpayer or commissioner, yeah. It's like a guarantee of quality. Louisa? Assuring commissioners are satisfied with quality of service. Jan? Lots of good reasons. Customer and client confidence validates internal self-assessment, drives continuous improvement. That's from Stuart.
Hey, we can pack up and go home now, Sejal. I think they got it.
They've got it.
Should you look at the definition we've come up with?
Yeah.
There we go.
So it's to maintain the confidence of stakeholders, including the Department for Work and Pensions, the public, because it is the public purse that we're using to deliver these services, as well as staff. So it's all your stakeholders. Stakeholders rely on the successful conduct of an organisation's activities. They want to be assured that you've got robust internal processes in place and are providing accurate and credible information to support their decision making in relation to, for instance, policy and regulation. As we know, even as a customer yourself, where there is no trust, where there is a question or a concern, or you're uncertain about the quality of service or the integrity of information, trust and also confidence can diminish.
Absolutely. Going back to my new house example, if you then go into a field and there's no house there, you can't see it, you're not then too sure, is it really going to be there at all? If the builder's got a poor reputation about either completing on time, your confidence is going to be diminished. Even if the house is there and it's fully built and you then find the certificates are all forged, your confidence again is hit, isn't it? So assurance is important because it has to inspire that confidence, and also requires some research to make sure that the assurances that are being provided are appropriate and accurate. And as Sejal said, all of us, because it's subjective, have a different level of confidence. Some of us might take something at face value, others might want to research very, very carefully about whether something is factual or not. And of course, all our different stakeholders, they too are going to have different levels of confidence and are going to require different levels of assurance as well. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of organisations, commissioners in particular, you'll find they've set their levels of confidence. So they will, set exactly what they are looking for and where that sits. In particular, Department for Work and Pensions. So when it comes to assurance, it's really important that you ask them what it is that they're looking for as the customer, because they're the only ones that actually can tell you whether they are assured or not by the work that you're doing or the evidence that you are retaining.
Very good. So we're going to have the question, how do you actually achieve assurance? How is it possible to get that assurance? And also, what does assurance help us to achieve in our organisations? Well, hopefully the next slide might help a little bit there. So this slide is a bit complicated, but I'll just try and break it down a little bit. If you think about an organisation, you've got, or a company, you've got an objective, the things that you want to do, things you want to achieve, which leads us to some outcomes and results, perhaps the finished product or service. To achieve those outcomes, we would deploy systems, processes, money, people, all these things to help us achieve those objectives. At the same time, we have to work within a framework of rules and regulations. And that could be anything to do with the legal framework, the regulatory framework. We think about the requirements that DWP might place upon us. We have to stick to those. Things like health and safety. but also things around design briefs. If you have an IT system, you have to work within the parameters of that system. There's also elements of uncertainty, what we might call the risks, the things that could go horribly wrong, or even the things that get in the way of us achieving those objectives. So if you think about it, you could apply that model to any organization, be it a manufacturing, in the manufacturing sector, retail, in the service sector too, and service provision to individuals who require support and help. But here's the question. The questions we need to ask ourselves is, for example, did our systems and processes work properly? How do we get assurance? So we might think to ourselves, well, okay, we might want to find out how our staff are performing. We might find out how we're performing financially. Are we actually delivering the services that are required? Other questions we can ask ourselves is, did we conform to the rules? Now, I haven't used the word compliance here because compliance might just comes at the image of, or the thought of, simply sticking to the law. Conformity here is a broader sense in terms of, have we complied with design briefs? Have we followed our internal regulations and requirements as well? We think too about the risk. Have we identified and quantified and managed the risks that we face in order to deliver those outcomes and results? And critically, the quality. And this actually comes at the end of the process. Did actually the product or service meet stakeholder expectations? Now, the important thing with all these levels of assurance, so we pull assurance about from all these different areas, is you have to look at them all together. Because ultimately the key question is, what could we do better? Because the things we do better is then what we feed into our objectives, that feed the whole cycle again, so that we get outcomes and results that are of the appropriate quality, at the right cost, that comply with all the rules or conform to the rules, that manage the risks, and actually ultimately mean our stakeholders are happy and satisfied with everything that's provided for them, be it a service or be it a product. And that's really that's the ultimate goal really of assurance. If we can be assured across all those areas and we can drive improvements, that's how we can make things better for organizations and for ourselves. I hope that makes some sort of sense. We then have to ask the question, where does assurance come from? He says, clicking and hoping things would work. There we go. So perhaps again, we'll throw out to the group here, where does assurance come from? Who provides that assurance? So again, perhaps have a think about that.
So we've got government policy or professional bodies, a variety of departments or teams from Martin, stakeholder and participant feedback.
Yep.
From Anne-Louise. Any more? Think about the organisation, your setup. Second and third line functions, Stuart, e.g. risk and compliance, health and safety, internal audit activity and external scrutiny, for example, commissioner audits, etc. Robert, internal and external audits, and there's policies and procedures.
Excellent, this is all really good stuff. So we're going to share with you a slide. Again, it's a bit of a complex one, and some of you may be familiar with this concept. It's called the 3 lines of defense. And it looks hideously ugly. It does, at least at first sight. But what this is trying to explain is we get assurance from, if you like, 3 areas or 3 core areas of our organisation. We've got the first, second, and third line. The first line of defence, well, that's actually the work that's done day to day by staff and line management. Things like peer reviews, checks, making sure that things are done properly, making sure that there's management oversight, that type of thing. Then there's a second line, which is really oversight functions, potentially independent oversight functions that would step in and just test and review and sense check that what's happening at the first line is operating appropriately.
Can I
This
just,
way,
sorry,
Sejal, please butt in.
No, it's fine. Sorry, I was just going to say that it's not independent to the organisation, so they're independent to operations, perhaps, in terms of reporting line, but not independent to the organisation.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Sejal. Sorry, yes. I was thinking these are things like the risk management functions and things like perhaps your quality assurance functions within the organisation. So they're definitely not independent of the organisation, but independent of the operational roles. We then have our third line, which is independent assurance, which is from internal audit. Now, internal audit can be part of the organisation itself. In some cases, it's outsourced, but this is independent assurance is completely independent of the oversight and the day-to-day operations of the organisation. And you notice there that they are slightly to one side. Now, whilst all three lines have an accountability towards boards and committees and top management, internal audit is quite unique because it actually can affect leapfrog over line management straight into the non-executive roles as well. You know, particularly if there's issues that need to be brought to their attention, issues around management as well. And that's where the third line really comes into its own as that independent assurance. And then we've got external assurance providers. Now, sometimes that's regarded as a fourth line. So these are organisations that are completely outside of the remit of the company or the organisation itself. So you could be thinking here of actually the DWP provider assurance team, who they couldn't care less what the organisation is doing, providing the organisation is doing what it's supposed to do in terms of the contract. So they're not interested in the internal politics or anything like that. So they are completely independent. But all of those also can provide assurance back to the board, the committees, that things are happening as they should be, or if they're not, they can provide alerts that corrective action needs to be taken. Perhaps what you can do is just look closer or more closely at these assurance bodies. Unless you want to throw anything else, Sejal, at this point.
I was just going to say that it's really important that the organisation structure and activities in particular around sort of assurance activities is aligned to the organisation's objectives, and that each function, each line works together to provide assurance, and first line and second line in particular are sufficiently robust and to avoid relying on third line and also external assurance. The organisation should actually be assuring themselves, satisfying themselves that they're managing risks or complying with regulations, etc., not relying on third line and assurance to come in and do that for them.
And that's a really important point. In fact, I should mention it, that we know you've got the first, second and third line. There's no sort of seniority between any of those, and they're all equally as important. The second line relies on the first line doing its job, the third line relies on the second line doing its job, and together they provide a collective, cohesive assurance for the whole of the organisation. So it's really important that it's not a case that perhaps the first line can defer to second or third or anything like that. Everyone has a role to play. It just depends on the level of scrutiny. So on an operational level, then if you're working with the individual, then you might be interested in the records relating to the individual. The second line might be interested in the processes around how the individual's managed, and the third line would be perhaps interested in the whole of the management arrangements. But between them, they all provide assurance. It just depends on your level of granularity.
Yeah.
So if we click onto this next slide, which is about the assurance bodies. So these, if you like, these are the groups, or some of the groups that might require assurance. So as you noticed in the previous slide, we have non-executive directors, trustees, and organisation. Well, they are, if you like, the owners of the organisation. They're the ones who are ultimately accountable for the activities of the organisation, and they would need assurance that the processes they have authorised to put in place are working appropriately. We then look at the prime providers. I'm sure many of you here may be perhaps subcontractors to another prime provider. And if you are, then in the same way that if you employed someone perhaps to service your car or do some work in your house, you'd want some assurance that they're going to do a proper job. The prime providers are exactly the same. They would want assurance that you are delivering the services that you've been employed to do. Conversely, if you're a prime provider, you would want assurance that your subcontractors are doing exactly what they've been asked to do. And ultimately, commissioners, they are going to want assurance, aren't they? The DWP will want assurance, for example, that you're delivering your services appropriately in accordance to contract. And ultimately, if you think about the political dynamic, that the people who are being assisted and supported are actually are gaining the support and assistance that they need, because ultimately that's why the DWP spends millions of pounds in commissioning services. And of course that applies to other organisations as well. And then we think about assessment agencies. Sorry, Sage, you're going to jump in now, weren't you?
I was going to jump in just on DWP. So, you know, you may be familiar with the DWP Provider Assurance Team, and they are the ones that actually, on behalf of DWP, assure or conduct assurance reviews to assure and satisfy the Commissioner that organisations delivering services, for instance, you know, the contracts you have in place like JET's Restart Work and Health Programme, are generally delivering what they say that they do. So what you've put in your bid, the three areas that they do focus on in particular are governance. So that's around sort of the management of the organisation, anti-fraud measures, performance and your tracking systems, service delivery, which is around the customer journey and progressing customers, and your claims procedures, so ensuring that, you know, you are submitting what you're entitled to. And they do periodically test and use also evidence that you submit as intelligence to inform their opinions.
That's excellent, thank you. We then move on to things like assessment agencies. We've got the ISO assessments. So maybe your organisation is certified to ISO 9001 or perhaps 14001. These assessment agencies, they too are going to want assurance that the services you deliver are compliant with those particular standards. And again, remembering those are external to your organisation, but they still need that level of assurance. And it's really a sort of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of thing, because when they get assurance, then they're quite happy to give awards. Then clearly you can use those awards in marketing and demonstrating again the quality of your organisation. Taking a further step back, we've got regulatory bodies, for example, the Information Commission's Office, that would want assurance that in this case you're handling personal data in an appropriate way. So there's a range of bodies who would be interested to make in knowing that what you're doing is appropriate. They would need assurance, and if they don't get that assurance, then obviously it's where potentially the big stick could come out, which we don't want to see. So if we can provide that level of assurance to them, then that's going to be good all round, isn't it? We then need to think about, so there's some of the bodies, and I'm sure there's plenty more you can think of individuals and organisations that would require assurance. But just thinking about those three lines of defence, let's think of the agencies, those groups or individuals that do provide assurance. Now you think about staff and line management. Now, many of yourselves here could be working on the front line. You might think to yourself, well, what role do I play in providing assurance? But ultimately, everything you do in terms of checking, cross-checking, perhaps supporting someone else, providing training and development, following the directions given to you by your management, all those things help in providing assurance to to the organisation that things are being done appropriately. Line management similarly, because of the instructions they give, the direction they're given to assist in that assurance role. And those are sort of things that the internal auditors would then look at. They'd ask the questions: are the systems and processes effective and appropriate? Are the cost of delivery appropriate? Are the outcomes appropriate? Are they the right outcomes? External auditors similarly, taking more of a helicopter view, will be looking potentially at the whole organisation, asking the same sorts of questions though about whether the organisation is delivering what it's supposed to deliver. Obviously, from external audit's perspective, primarily they're going to focus on the financial elements of the organisation, although they can from time to time stray elsewhere. But their focus primarily is on finances. You know, is the organisation demonstrating value for money? Is the organisation actually spending its money in appropriate ways, accounting for its income appropriately? All these sorts of things. And then Sage mentioned before the provider assurance team as an example. They too would not only want to provide assurance to their master DWP, but also they can give assurance to the organisation, because when you work with the PATs, so the PAT team, that's a double comment, isn't it? So you work with PAT, then you're telling them how you build your assurance, and they too can independently review what you've done and perhaps give you the nod and say, yeah, we are assured by what you're doing and what you've told us. And so again, it's one of these mutual back scratching exercises where you tell them what you're doing, they say we're happy with it, they might give you advice about how to improve that type of thing. But ultimately, these are all agencies that can provide assurance. Is there anything else you want to throw in here, Sejal, at all?
What I would say is that, although they're auditors and they are coming in to assure themselves, organisations should use every opportunity as a learning opportunity. And that's ultimately what, assurance reviews are about. It's not just, providing assurance in terms of where things are happening and or not, where gaps are. But it's also highlighting good practice as well. And I think it's really important to take it as a positive and an opportunity to learn and share, the good that the organisations are doing.
Very good. And of course, assurance is only as good as actually what we do with it. So our next slide answers the question, how does it drive continuous improvement? And there's several things there. Certainly inspire stakeholder confidence. And we're looking at all stakeholders here, everything from internal stakeholders, perhaps staff, volunteers, members of the public. We're looking at the commissioners, other bodies, perhaps supply chain partners, all these things. That inspires confidence that what the organisation is doing, what you're doing, is the right thing. We said too about assurance, getting it from different areas, different angles. It also helps us to find out where things are going wrong and enables, say, rapid response or even rapid remediation. So we find something's going wrong, let's try and put it right, and then retest using the same process of assurance processes to see whether what we've done has worked. That links into the intelligence to take those corrective and preventative actions. And this really links us right back to our organisation, where the organisation says, I want to achieve X, Y, and Z. Well, can we achieve X, Y, and Z in a better way? And so we can make tweaks to existing processes, but also we can look to the future. How does assurance help us look to the future? Well, it gives us intelligence to ascertain perhaps what it is that the customer, the service user, the commissioner wants, not just now, in the future. And that can help us to direct our activities. So in the future, we've got a better opportunity of doing things right. And provide a common focus. And it's so important that assurance is considered by the whole organisation, because then it helps all of us in the organisation, irrespective whether perhaps you're a senior manager, whether you're a supply chain manager or supply chain partner, whether you're working in the finance team, whether you're working on the front line helping customers to improve their lives. All of us with information about insurance can be informed to take appropriate actions and work together on having a common goal. Is there anything else to throw in, Sejal, at all from you?
I'll just echo what you say. I think, you know, it is that common focus and goal for the organisation, and using assurance as continuous improvement, but also, you know, confirming sort of or validating, I suppose, ratifying the plans and processes that you have in place. The other point that I'd like to make is that, you know, assurance is also, it's not just around compliance and assuring and satisfying, you know, commissioners, etc. It's also, you know, to demonstrate, you know, all the good stuff that you're doing, and to support, you know, the work of the organisation when there are investigations or complaints that you're also having to support. So yeah, so I think, you know, I think we've covered it, Mike.
Okay, so let's just wrap all this up into some learning points, I hope. There we go. So remember, we've learned, haven't we, that assurance is all to do with confidence and comfort, but it is subjective. That one person's level of confidence may be different to another person's level of confidence. And it's important that, you know, for the organisations we work with, to understand what level of confidence our stakeholders require. The DWP may want a very high level of confidence in certain elements. Your top management may want a different level of confidence. An agency such as the Information Commissioner would want confidence about particular elements of the work you do, in particular around data protection. So it is subjective, and it is varied. It's so important that we find out actually who wants what and at what level do they want it. But it's important too to remember that assurance does provide protection, and it helps us to drive improvement. And it helps us to achieve what I call the radio, which is not an Italian word, but it's something which I sort of pounced on with my time in quality management. It's an acronym: do it right and do it once. If we can achieve that in our organizations, that drives out so much efficiency, because obviously if you have to do things once, we've got to get them done correctly. That's fantastic, but we need assurance and that intelligence to help us to understand where we might be doing things wrong, and then what we need to do is put right. Ultimately, if we can achieve do it right and do it once, then that'd be a fantastic achievement for organizations. An important thing too about assurance is that it can only drive improvement if considered in the round. But what I mean by this is that we can't just look at assurance around one aspect of organizations. Just because we're compliant perhaps with rules and regulations, it doesn't necessarily mean the services provided are any good. Just because we're doing things cheaply or perhaps cost effectively, it doesn't mean that the quality is there. It could be that we're focusing completely on quality at all costs. But if we do that at the expense of perhaps of price, of performance, then that too isn't going to be very good. We need to consider all of these elements together jointly. And to be honest, you may find if you do that, there's a compromise. That sometimes we cannot have 100% quality if we're going to achieve our performance. It could be we can't have 100% performance if we're going to achieve our compliance. So there may need to be compromises somewhere in your organisation. And there is no one way, no one correct way of achieving this. It is the right fit for the organisation. Is there anything else to throw in there, Sejal, at all?
Just that everyone has a role in assurance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you could really said it fairer than that. It is everyone's responsibility to maintain assurance, to achieve assurance, and to drive that continuous improvement. And I think that takes us to our final slide, which is open forum. So really, it'd be great if you could share your thoughts, your comments, questions or queries with us, and we can perhaps try our best to respond, or if necessary, go off, do some research and come back to you.
Just to say, we did have a message pop into me from Jan Townsend, who had to dip out because of broadband issues, but she said it was an absolute brilliant session and she will be catching up on the recording. So that's good for you guys to hear.
Oh, thank you very much.
Any questions, comments, thoughts, observations?
Insults?
I think it is something that people often think of as a complicated topic, but it's multi-layered, and it's understanding those layers and the connections between them, which was really interesting to find out more about.
And I think that it really is important to highlight. And as Sejal said, it's everyone's responsibility, and it's one of those things where it can be complicated. But if you peel back those layers of complexity, the concept is actually quite straightforward.
It is. It is. I think we overcomplicate it, don't we? And I think it's because also we tag it onto things, don't we? Like risk assurance, compliance assurance, quality assurance. And all those facets have a place within sort of within assurance, but they also all sort of work to help the organisation achieve assurance, right?
Absolutely.
Evidence. So yeah, it is something that is difficult, can be difficult to get your head around. So we've got some comments coming through. So really enjoyed the session, very accessible and clear. Thank you. The session will be on YouTube. Okay, thanks. Thank you for this session. I think time is an often underestimated resource, and have to balance time deadlines with quality assurance as best as you can. Yes, absolutely. Like Martin, like Diradio.
The new Italian word.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just popped a message in there because Louisa was asking whether we'd be sending slides out. Louise, you'll be pleased to know that if you go to YouTube and type in the Institute of Employability Professionals, you will find a recording of this session in about 7 days' time.
And more than happy for you to contact us directly. Our information is there. So if you've got any questions or would like, to explore this, in and quality, risk, etc. further, happy to do so.
Yeah, just a thought about Diradio as well. I sort of came up with that when stuck at some traffic lights near my home. On this, I think it was the second or third time that they dug at the same piece of road. I thought, if only they did it right, so they have to do it once. And that was really where it came from.
We've got a question from Stuart, Mike. So any top tips for smaller organisations who may not be able to apply a true 3 lines approach, resources, budgets, etc.?
Yeah, I'm making an assumption for a small organisation, you may not have an internal audit function, or possibly not even an external audit function if you're that small. The important thing is to have some mechanism that can independently review what's happening at the front line. And that could be that you may have line management who are doing some rigorous reviews. Even peer review is really, really helpful. And usually small organizations, if I said there's more trust there, that sounds like the big organizations aren't very trustworthy, but my experience is a smaller organization, there tends to be a greater level of cohesion. And I think it's possible then for individuals to take criticism in the nicest way better from others. So peer review is a really important tool that you can use in a small organization to provide that assurance.
Yeah, I agree. It's worked for us in the past, hasn't it? Peer review. Separation of duties is the other thing that you can apply.
Very true.
Independence would be very difficult, but as long as the person checking isn't the one that's doing, it should be fine. Yeah.
I tend to find small organisations that there's a greater level of openness and transparency.
Yeah.
And as you say, Sejal, the segregation of duties, separation of activities is a really helpful tool.
Lots of thanks, and people being very grateful for the session. It looks like everyone was very much enjoying your session today. And I believe you guys are also returning next week for episode 78 of our Live Learn Lunch.
We are. Next week we'll be talking about change management, in particular climate. So it's the culture of the organisation and how to create the right climate and manage through it. Take your people along with you. So very much looking forward to that session, and I'll be joined by Deborah Skyers, who's managing partner at Meraki.
Lovely. Okay, I think we'll wrap up today's session. We've had lots of thanks and lots of goodbyes. Sejal and Mike, if you want to hold on while we let everybody leave and get back to their working day. It was great to see you all again. Thanks so much. I will now switch off the recording. So have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.